The chandeliers blazed with the kind of light that only appears when destiny decides to reveal itself to the world, golden and unrelenting, casting shadows that danced across marble floors, like whispers of ancient prophecies finally coming true. In the center of the grand ballroom stood a woman whose presence commanded the room not through force, but through an elegance so natural it seemed woven into her very bones. Her name was Amara, and she wore a gown that shimmered like captured moonlight, each thread telling a story of transformation that no one in that room could have predicted 6 months ago. Around her, 300 guests held their breath, their champagne glasses frozen mid-air, their designer shoes rooted to floors that suddenly felt sacred. Behind her stood 3 women, whose faces had turned to stone, their carefully painted smiles cracking like porcelain under pressure. Simone, Kendra, and Yvette, the elite daughters of old money and older pride, stood paralyzed by disbelief. And before Amara, with eyes that held both infinite tenderness and unmovable resolve, stood Malik Laurent himself, billionaire, visionary, the man whose name alone could shift economies and change futures, the man the world thought they knew. But the world knew nothing. They knew the headlines, the Forbes rankings, the corporate acquisitions that made financial analysts weep with envy. They knew the surface, the tailored suits, the private jets, the mansions that dotted coastlines like monuments to human ambition. What they didn't know was why this man who could have chosen anyone had chosen her. Why Malik Laurent, who had dated supermodels and heiresses, who had been pursued by women with pedigrees longer than ancient manuscripts, stood now placing a ring on the finger of a woman who 6 months ago had been cleaning floors in Simone Beaumont's penthouse apartment. The officiant's voice rolled through the space like thunder before rain, asking questions that felt less like formality and more like destiny demanding acknowledgement. Simone's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering across the floor in a sound that echoed like breaking pride, like the death of assumptions everyone had taken as gospel truth. The guests gasped collectively, a sound that rippled through the room like wind through wheat fields, carrying with it shock and fascination, and the uncomfortable realization that everything they believed about worth and status might be built on foundations of sand. Malik's voice cut through the chaos with the clarity of a bell struck in a silent cathedral, steady and deep and absolutely final, when he said the words that would change everything. I do. The room erupted not in celebration, but in the kind of collective disbelief that only comes when the universe rewrites the rules everyone thought were carved in stone. Amara's eyes glistened with tears that weren't born of sadness but of triumph, the kind of tears a warrior sheds when the battle is finally won, and she stands victorious not through violence but through the sheer force of her unbreakable spirit. She had walked through fire and emerged not as ash but as gold, refined and radiant and absolutely certain of her place in this moment. The photographers' cameras flashed like lightning, capturing what would become the most talked-about wedding of the decade, the image that would grace magazine covers and social media feeds and inspire countless conversations about love and class and the courage it takes to choose your own destiny. But to understand how this moment came to be, how a woman who once scrubbed other people's messes came to stand beside a king, we must journey back. The village of Alondo existed at the edge of the world, where the land stretched golden and endless, beneath skies so impossibly blue they looked painted by hands that still believed in beauty as a form of prayer. This was where Amara first drew breath, where she learned to walk on red soil that stained her feet the color of sunsets, where she discovered that wealth wasn't always measured in currency, but sometimes in the warmth of community and the richness of tradition passed down through generations. Her mother, Thandiwe, was a seamstress whose hands moved with the precision of an artist and the patience of a saint, creating garments that transformed fabric into stories, every stitch a testament to her belief that even the simplest cloth deserved to be treated with dignity. Her father, Joseph, worked the land with hands that knew soil better than most people knew their own reflections, coaxing life from earth with the gentle insistence of someone who understood that growth couldn't be rushed, only nurtured. They didn't have much by the standards of those who measured success in possessions, but what they had, they shared freely and joyfully, teaching their children that true wealth lived in the spirit. Amara was the eldest of 3 children, bearing the weight and the privilege of being the one her younger brothers looked toward when the world grew confusing or frightening. Kofi and Jabari followed her through the village, like shadows following light, trusting that their sister's footsteps would always lead them somewhere safe. She carried that responsibility with grace, even when it felt heavy, even when she wanted to put it down and just be a child herself, running through fields without the burden of expectation pressing against her shoulders. She learned to read by candlelight, her mother's old books spread across a wooden table worn smooth by years of family dinners and homework sessions and hands folded in evening prayer. She learned mathematics by helping her father calculate seed quantities and harvest yields, discovering that numbers could tell stories just as compelling as the folktales her grandmother whispered on warm evenings when the stars came out like ancestors watching over them. She learned about dignity by watching her mother turn away customers who tried to underpay for her work, quietly and firmly insisting that her skill had value that couldn't be negotiated downward just because someone wanted to exploit her kindness. When Amara was 16, her father's back gave out during planting season, the years of bending and lifting finally demanding payment that his body could no longer afford to give. She watched him try to stand straight, watched the pain flash across his face like lightning, watched him pretend everything was fine, even as his hands trembled. That night, she made a decision that would alter the trajectory of her entire life. She told her parents she was leaving school, that education could wait, but their survival couldn't, that her brothers needed to eat more ADs than she needed textbooks. Her mother wept, her father argued, but Amara had inherited their stubbornness along with their grace, and once her mind was set, it became immovable as mountains. She took a job at the village market too, selling the fabrics her mother created, learning to negotiate with buyers who tried to take advantage of her youth, discovering she had a talent for reading people, for seeing past their words into their intentions. She sent every spare coin home, keeping only enough for the cheapest meals and the smallest room in a boarding house that smelled of old cooking oil and unfulfilled dreams. By the time Amara turned 18, she had exhausted the possibilities of the village, squeezed every opportunity until there was nothing left but the same small market stall and the same familiar faces and the growing realization that if she wanted to truly help her family, she needed to go where the money actually lived. The city called to her, not with the promise of glamour, but with the simple mathematics of survival. Higher wages meant more money sent home, meant her brothers could stay in school, meant her parents could afford medicine, meant the future might be brighter than the present. So she packed a worn suitcase with 3 dresses her mother had sewn, 2 pairs of shoes that had been restored more times than she could count, and a heart too brave for its own good. Her mother gave her a necklace, simple silver, with a small pendant shaped like a seed, and said something Amara would never forget. "Remember, my daughter, that every great tree was once just a seed that refused to quit growing." The bus ride to the city took 6 hours, and Amara watched through the window as the landscape transformed from the golden familiarity of home to the gray concrete jungle of ambition and anonymity. The city was a beast that devoured dreams with the casual efficiency of something that had been doing it for centuries, its streets filled with people who had arrived with hope and left with resignation. But Amara refused to become another cautionary tale, another village girl broken by the cold indifference of urban ambition. She found work quickly because she was willing to do what others weren't, to clean toilets and scrub floors and wash dishes until her hands cracked and bled. Never complaining, because complaining was a luxury she couldn't afford. The employment agency placed her with wealthy families who lived in penthouses that cost more per month than her entire village made in a year. People who had so much money they couldn't possibly spend it all, but who still somehow managed to treat their staff like they were dispensable pieces of furniture. One of those families was the Beaumonts, and it was there that Amara's story truly began, though she didn't know it yet. She only knew that Mrs. Simone Beaumont was 24 years old, beautiful, in the way expensive things are beautiful, all sharp edges and polished surfaces and carefully maintained perfection that looked stunning from a distance but felt cold up close. Simone treated Amara exactly how people who have never struggled treat people who have never stopped struggling, with casual dismissiveness that wasn't quite cruelty but wasn't kindness either, just the blank indifference of someone who had never needed to consider the humanity of the people who made their life comfortable. She said things like, "Amara, the floors," without looking up from her phone, as if Amara's sole purpose for existing was to ensure her marble tiles remained spotless. She corrected Amara's pronunciation of fancy French food names with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. She left messes specifically for Amara to clean, as if the act of creating work for someone else was itself a form of entertainment. And Amara took it all without complaint, not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough to understand that her dignity didn't depend on Simone's perception of her, that being underestimated was sometimes an advantage, that the person cleaning the floors often sees and hears things the person lounging on the sofa never realizes are being observed. She worked. She smiled. She saved every coin. And at night, in her tiny rented room, she studied business courses online and dreamed practical dreams about better jobs and small houses and her brothers graduating from university. She never dreamed of billionaires because billionaires existed in a different universe, one that didn't intersect with the reality of women who sent half their paychecks home and ate instant noodles for dinner 4 nights a week. She never dreamed of ballrooms or designer gowns or men whose casual spending money could fund an entire village's development. She dreamed small, achievable dreams, the kind that felt possible if she just worked hard enough and stayed focused and didn't let the city's casual cruelty break something essential inside her. But destiny doesn't ask permission before it rearranges your entire life. It simply arrives, often disguised as coincidence or chance, and sets in motion events that will only make sense years later when you look back and realize there was never any other way things could have unfolded. For Amara, destiny arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in the form of a man in a perfectly tailored navy suit, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than her entire year's salary. His name was Malik Laurent, and he was there for a business meeting with Simone's father, something about investment portfolios and corporate expansion that Amara didn't understand and didn't need to understand. She was carrying a tray of tea when their eyes met, just for a second, just long enough for something ancient and inexplicable to pass between them like electricity, like recognition, like two souls acknowledging across a crowded room that they had known each other before time began. Amara looked away first, because looking at men like him was dangerous for women like her, because eye contact could be misinterpreted as invitation, because she had learned to make herself invisible around wealth to protect herself from accusations she would never be able to defend against. She set down the tray with hands that had suddenly become unsteady, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't name, and left the room as quickly as propriety allowed. Malik watched her go, watched the way she moved with unconscious grace, watched the way she carried herself with quiet dignity, despite wearing a housekeeping uniform, watched the way something about her presence made the air in the room feel different, charged with possibility. He didn't know her name yet, but he knew with certainty that felt like prophecy that this woman, this stranger who had just served him tea, was going to change his entire life. Malik came back 7 times over the next 2 months, each visit ostensibly about business with Mr. Beaumont, each visit somehow timed perfectly to coincide with Amara's work schedule in ways that Simone initially dismissed as coincidence because the alternative was too uncomfortable to consider. He asked Amara questions that wealthy men weren't supposed to ask their housekeepers, questions that treated her like a person rather than a service, questions about what she read and where she came from, and what she thought about things that mattered. And Amara, despite every instinct screaming that men like him didn't speak to women like her unless they wanted something temporary and cruel, found herself answering because his questions weren't predatory. They were genuinely curious, as if he actually cared about the texture of her thoughts and the landscape of her soul. They had conversations in hallways while she folded laundry, brief exchanges that felt more substantial than entire evenings of small talk at fancy parties. He told her about books he loved. She told him about her village. He asked about her dreams. She asked about his burdens. And slowly, carefully, without either of them quite realizing it was happening, they began building something that looked like friendship but felt like destiny, assembling itself, piece by careful piece. One evening, Simone threw a dinner party that was less about hospitality and more about display. 30 guests gathered to witness her performance of sophistication and success. Crystal glasses caught candlelight like captured stars. A chef flown in from Paris prepared food that tasted expensive, but somehow left everyone still feeling empty. Women wore dresses that cost 5 figures and jewelry that required insurance policies. Men discussed deals and markets and opportunities with the casual aggression of predators discussing territory. And Amara moved through it all like a ghost, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that guests took without looking at her face, as if the food simply materialized through magic rather than through her labor. Simone wore red, blood red, the color of conquest and desire, and positioned herself beside Malik all evening with the determination of someone trying to claim territory through proximity. Her hand grazed his arm. Her laugh rang out too loud. Her desperation showed like slip showing beneath the dress. But Malik's eyes kept finding Amara across the room, through the crowd, in stolen glances that felt like entire conversations, conducted in a language only the two of them understood. Kendra noticed first, because Kendra Montgomery had made a career of noticing things that could be weaponized. Her sharp lawyer's mind, always cataloging information that might prove useful later. She leaned toward Yvette, whispered something that made them both smile like predators spotting wounded prey. Something about how fascinating it was that Malik Laurent couldn't seem to take his eyes off the help. Yvette laughed, the kind of laugh that draws blood, without leaving visible wounds, and suggested perhaps he was simply ensuring his drink wasn't being poisoned, as if that level of paranoia was more plausible than the alternative. But Simone didn't laugh, because she saw it too. saw the way Malik's attention kept drifting toward a woman wearing an apron and carrying a tray, saw the way his expression softened when he looked at Amara, in a way it never softened when he looked at her. Something cold and sharp twisted in Simone's chest, not quite jealousy, something darker, something closer to fear, the fear of losing something she'd never actually had, but had convinced herself was hers by right. After the guests left, after the caterers packed up, and the lights dimmed, Simone cornered Amara in the kitchen, where she stood, washing crystal glasses, with hands that had gone numb from cold water. "Stay away from him," Simone said, her voice low and dangerous, carrying the kind of threat that wealthy people deliver with smiles because they've never needed to raise their voices to destroy someone. Amara looked up, confused and exhausted, her hands still submerged in soapy water, and tried to say she didn't understand what Simone meant. But Simone cut her off with words sharp as broken glass. "Malik, stay away from Malik Laurent. I'm not blind, Amara. I see the way he looks at you. And I'm telling you now, as someone who's trying to help you, I'll stay away." Amara pulled her hands from the water, dried them on her apron, her heart pounding with something between anger and fear. She started to protest that there was nothing between them, nothing inappropriate. But Simone kept talking, kept delivering warnings disguised as concern. "Men like Malik Laurent don't marry maids, Amara. They use them. They take what they want, and then they leave. And you'll be left broken and stupid enough to believe it was love. Is that what you want? To be some rich man's scandal? To be the girl who thought she could climb above her station and got crushed for her ambition?" The words hit Amara like physical blows, not because she believed them entirely, but because a small, frightened part of her worried they might contain some truth, that maybe she was being naive, that maybe Malik's attention was just boredom, or curiosity, or the kind of temporary interest wealthy men develop for novelty, before returning to their own worlds. That night, walking home through rain that fell like the city's tears, Amara made a decision to protect herself, to keep her distance, to remember who she was and where she came from, and that fairy tales didn't happen to girls who cleaned other people's messes for minimum wage. She would be polite if she saw Malik again, but distant. She would protect her heart. She would not allow herself to hope for things that existed only in movies and novels, not in the real world, where women like her ended up hurt and discarded. But the universe had other plans, because the very next morning, when Amara left her apartment building, there stood Malik Laurent on the sidewalk, holding 2 paper cups of coffee, looking remarkably like a billionaire who had decided to abandon every rule of logic and propriety, because sometimes the heart knows better than the mind what it needs to survive. "I thought you might need this," he said simply, offering her one of the cups, steam rising between them like prayer, like possibility, like the manifestation of something that defied every rule Amara had been taught about how the world worked. She stared at him, at the coffee, at the quiet audacity of a man worth billions, standing on a cracked sidewalk outside her building that had peeling paint and broken mailboxes, looking at her like she was the valuable one, like he was the one hoping to be accepted. "Why?" Amara whispered, the word carrying the weight of every doubt and fear and warning she'd accumulated. "Why me? Why are you here? What do you want?" Malik's expression softened, transformed into something vulnerable and honest, the mask of the billionaire businessman falling away, to reveal just a man standing before a woman, asking the oldest question in human history. "Do you see me?" "I want to know you," he said, quietly. "Not the version of you that serves champagne and disappears, not the version that bows and apologizes, I want to know the woman who reads philosophy books on the bus, the woman who sends half her paycheck to her family, the woman whose eyes hold entire galaxies when she thinks no one's watching. Amara's breath caught in her throat because no one, absolutely no one in her entire life, had ever looked at her the way Malik was looking at her now, like she was the story rather than a footnote, like she was the destination rather than something to pass through on the way to somewhere more important. And in that moment, standing on a sidewalk in rain-cleaned morning light, with coffee steam rising between them, Amara made the choice that would change everything. She took the coffee, she smiled, and she said the words that would begin their real story. I finish work at 5. They met in secret for 3 months. Coffee at dawn before her shift started. Walks through parks where no one recognized him, and she could forget for a little while the vast difference in their worlds. Late-night phone calls that stretched until sunrise, filled with conversations that ranged from philosophy to childhood memories, to dreams deferred but never abandoned. Malik told her things he'd never told anyone, about the loneliness of wealth that looked like success from the outside, but felt like isolation from the inside, about growing up in a family where love was negotiated rather than given, about building an empire because he didn't know how else to prove he mattered. Amara told him about Elondo, about the way sunrise looked when it broke over golden fields, about her mother's hands that could create beauty from scraps of fabric, about her father's laugh that sounded like home, about dreams that had been deferred but never abandoned, because hope was the one thing poverty couldn't steal if you refused to surrender it. They fell in love the way storms fall, inevitable, powerful, impossible to stop once the first drops begin, building from gentle rain to downpour, to the kind of deluge that transforms entire landscapes. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. It was the slow accumulation of moments where they each discovered the other was exactly who they'd been searching for, without knowing they were searching. But Simone was watching, documenting, collecting evidence like a prosecutor building a case, because wealthy people don't accept defeat gracefully. They retaliate. She hired a private investigator who took photographs of Malik's hand on Amara's back, their heads bent close in conversation, the way he looked at her, like she was oxygen and he'd been holding his breath his entire life. And then, armed with evidence and righteousness and the absolute certainty that she was protecting her territory, Simone made her move. She invited Amara to lunch, just the two of them, at a restaurant so expensive that even the silence between courses cost more than most people's monthly rent. Simone smiled across the table with an expression that didn't reach her eyes, her perfectly manicured hands folded like she was about to deliver a sermon. I know about you and Malik, she said simply, watching Amara's face for signs of panic or guilt. Amara's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression neutral, saying there was nothing to know. Nothing inappropriate had happened. Simone laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Don't lie to me. I have photos, dates, times, documentation of every secret meeting. I know everything. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt louder than shouting. I'm going to make you an offer, and you're going to accept it if you have any sense of self-preservation. $50,000. Leave the city. Never contact him again. Disappear. And in return, I won't destroy you. Because I will, Amara. I'll make sure every wealthy family in this city knows you seduced a client. You'll never work again. Your family back in that pathetic little village. I'll make sure they know exactly what kind of daughter they raised. What kind of woman sells herself to rich men? For a moment, Amara sat frozen, the room tilting around her, her hands trembling not with fear but with rage, pure, clean, righteous rage that burned through every doubt and replaced it with diamond-hard certainty. She stood slowly, deliberately, her movements controlled and graceful, and looked down at Simone with something that might have been pity if it weren't so fierce. "You can keep your money, Miss Beaumont," Amara said quietly, each word precisely placed, like stones building a foundation. "And you can keep your threats, because I don't need your permission to be loved. I don't need your approval to exist, and I certainly don't need your money to know my worth." She walked out of that restaurant with her head high, her spine straight, leaving Simone sitting alone in expensive silence, suddenly powerless despite all her wealth and connections and carefully constructed superiority. That evening, Amara called Malik and told him everything, her voice shaking not with fear, but with the aftermath of adrenaline, with the exhaustion that comes after standing your ground when every instinct screamed to run. She apologized for complicating his life, for creating scandal, for being the kind of liability his reputation couldn't afford. But Malik's voice, when he spoke, was steel wrapped in velvet, absolute certainty wrapped in tenderness, and he asked her a single question that would define everything that came after. "Do you love me?" The question hung in the air, like a bell waiting to be struck, like destiny waiting for acknowledgement, like the universe holding its breath to hear what she would say. "Yes," Amara breathed, the word barely audible, but carrying the weight of absolute truth. "God help me, yes." And then Malik said the words that would change everything. "Then marry me. Not in secret, not in shame. Marry me in front of everyone. Let them see. Let them know." Amara tried to protest, tried to explain that Simone would retaliate, that the world would judge, that his reputation would suffer. But Malik cut through every objection with words that felt like vows already. "Simone has no power here. The only power that matters is the power we give each other. And I choose you, Amara. I have chosen you from the moment I saw you. I will choose you every day for the rest of my life." 3 weeks later, Malik held a press conference that stopped traffic across 3 continents, cameras flashing like stars being born, reporters crowding like witnesses to history. "I'm getting married," Malik announced, his voice calm, but carrying the kind of conviction that made everyone listening understand this wasn't a casual decision, but a declaration of war against every assumption they'd made about what men like him valued. The room erupted with questions shouted over each other, journalists desperate for details, for confirmation, for the story that would dominate headlines for weeks. "Who is she? Where did you meet? Is she from a prominent family? What does she do?" Malik smiled, the kind of smile that held secrets and promises and absolute certainty. And he spoke her name like it was sacred text. "Amara Thandiwe Okoro. She's the daughter of a seamstress and a farmer from a village called Alondo. She's the woman who reminded me what it means to be human. She's the woman who taught me that wealth without love is just expensive loneliness, and she's the love of my life." The media scrambled, their phones appearing like weapons, frantically searching databases and social media for any information about this mystery woman who had somehow captured the heart of one of the world's most eligible billionaires. And what they found made the story even more explosive. Photographs of Amara in Simone Beaumont's penthouse, wearing a housekeeping uniform, carrying trays. The headlines screamed across newspapers and websites and social media platforms with the kind of fervor usually reserved for royal scandals or political earthquakes. "Billionaire to marry former maid," read one. "From floors to fortune, the Cinderella story of the decade," proclaimed another. Love or scandal? Malik Laurent's shocking choice questioned a third, as if love itself required justification when it crossed invisible lines drawn by class and status. The stories ranged from fairy tale romantic to cynically skeptical to outright hostile, with social commentators debating whether this was inspiring proof that love transcends class, or a publicity stunt, or evidence of billionaire eccentricity. But through it all, Malik remained unmoved, unshaken, his position as clear and immovable as mountains. He released a statement that was shared millions of times. "I'm marrying Amara, not despite who she is, but because of who she is. Her worth isn't determined by her job title or her bank account. Her worth exists in her character, her spirit, her grace. And anyone who can't see that is revealing more about their own limitations than about her value." The announcement destroyed Simone's social standing faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Her friends suddenly too busy to return calls, her invitations mysteriously lost in the mail. Because aligning yourself with the woman who tried to sabotage a billionaire's true love wasn't just poor judgment, it was social suicide. And the wealthy protect their positions by reading the room and adjusting accordingly. The wedding was planned in 30 days, not rushed, but intentional, because Malik didn't want to wait and Amara didn't want to hide. And together they decided that their love would be public and proud, and a challenge to everyone who thought people had fixed places they couldn't leave. The venue was a historic coastal estate, where golden light met ocean breeze, where 300 carefully chosen guests would witness not just a marriage, but a revolution in how they thought about value and worth. Amara's family traveled from Ilondo, her mother weeping from the moment the invitation arrived through the entire journey, her father walking with his back a little straighter, because his daughter had proven that hard work and dignity could take you anywhere, her brothers wearing new suits and looking at their sister like she was proof that miracles still happened in a cynical world. The invitations went to business partners and childhood friends, to village elders and corporate executives, to people from every part of their lives. And yes, Simone received an invitation, as did Kendra and Yvette, because sometimes the greatest victory isn't exclusion, but inclusion, forcing people to witness the triumph of everything they tried to prevent. It was a test, a choice, a moment where they could choose grace or bitterness, acceptance or resentment. They came, all three of them, dressed in designer gowns that cost more than most people's cars, their makeup perfect, their smiles practiced, but inside they were crumbling, breaking apart piece by piece, with every detail that reminded them they had lost something they'd never really had. When Amara walked down that aisle, the entire world seemed to pause, time itself holding its breath to witness this moment of transformation. She wore a gown designed by her mother's hands, every stitch placed with love and pride, and the knowledge that this dress would be photographed and studied and remembered. Her head was high, her steps were measured, her spirit was unbroken. And she wasn't just a bride. She was a declaration that worth isn't bestowed by others, but recognized by those wise enough to see it. That love doesn't require permission from society, but only honesty between two souls. Malik's vows were simple, but devastating in their sincerity, his voice carrying across the assembled guests, like truth demanding to be heard. "I was lost until I found you. I was powerful but not alive. I was successful by every measure the world uses except the one that matters. You taught me that the greatest wealth is to love and be loved without condition, without performance, without pretense. I vow to honor you not just in public, but in private. To protect you not by hiding you, but by standing beside you. To choose you not just today, but every day, in every moment. for the rest of my life. Amara's vows were poetry made flesh, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. You saw me when I was invisible. You loved me when I felt unworthy. You chose me when the world said I wasn't enough. I vow to walk beside you, not behind you, to dream with you, not for you, to build a life where love is the foundation, and grace is the roof, and in truth is the door we walk through every morning. I choose you, Malik Laurent, today and every day after. When they kissed, the room erupted in applause that sounded like thunder, like celebration, like the acknowledgement that sometimes the story turns out exactly as it should. The reception was magic made visible, every detail perfect, not because of money spent, but because of love invested. Tables dressed in ivory and gold, music that felt like honey poured into air, laughter that sounded like freedom, finally granted after years of imprisonment. Amara's mother approached Malik during the first dance, her weathered seamstress hands taking his smooth billionaire hands, and she looked into his eyes with the wisdom of a woman who had survived everything life could throw at her and emerged with faith intact. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion, for seeing my daughter the way God sees her, the way I've always seen her, the way the world should have seen her all along. Malik's eyes glistened with unshed tears because he understood what she was really saying, that mothers know their children's worth even when the world is blind to it. And he whispered back, "She saved me, Mama Thandiwe. I'm the one who should be grateful." She reminded me that success without love is just expensive loneliness, that power without purpose is just organized emptiness. Across the room, at a table carefully positioned neither too close nor too far, Simone sat with Kendra and Yvette, picking at food that tasted like ash, sipping champagne that had lost its sparkle. She got lucky, Kendra muttered, the words hollow even to her own ears, a defense mechanism against the uncomfortable realization that luck had nothing to do with it. Lucky? Yvette scoffed, but her voice lacked conviction, sounded more like someone trying to convince herself than anyone else. She played him. She must have. Women like her don't end up with men like him unless there's manipulation involved. But Simone said nothing, because deep down, beneath the jealousy and wounded pride and defensive anger, she knew the truth that her friends were still too proud to admit. Amara hadn't played anyone. Amara hadn't manipulated or schemed or strategized. Amara had simply been herself, authentic, graceful, real. And that authenticity was something Simone had spent her whole life trying to buy, but never could, because it can't be purchased, only cultivated, only earned, through the hard work of becoming someone worth knowing. Later that evening, Malik pulled Amara aside, onto a balcony overlooking the ocean, the moon painting silver paths across water that looked like roads to other worlds. "I have something to tell you," he said softly, his voice carrying weight that made Amara turn to face him fully, curious and slightly concerned. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an old photograph, its edges worn from handling. The image faded but still clear enough to see the couple it depicted. A woman beautiful and regal in traditional clothing, standing beside a man in a Western suit, both of them smiling with the kind of joy that transcends time. "My grandparents," Malik explained, his voice gentle with memory and meaning. "My grandfather was a diplomat. My grandmother was a village girl, a farmer's daughter, who everyone said wasn't suitable for a man of his position. They faced everything we're facing, the judgment, the whispers, the shock, the social consequences. His family threatened to disown him. Her village worried he would abandon her. Society said it would never work. But they married anyway. and they built a legacy that became the foundation of everything I am today. They taught our family that love built on truth is indestructible, that worth isn't assigned by society, but recognized by those wise enough to see it. Amara stared at the photograph, at the resemblance between the man in the picture and Malik, at the woman whose story echoed her own, not across generations, and she felt something profound settle in her chest, the understanding that their love wasn't an anomaly, but a continuation, that destiny had been moving toward this moment for longer than either of them had been alive. "So, this isn't the first time your family has crossed these lines?" she asked softly. "No," Malik replied, wrapping his arms around her as they stood overlooking the ocean that looked like liquid silver under moonlight. "And it won't be the last. Because we don't choose love based on other people's approval. We choose it because it's right, because it's real, because it's us. My grandmother used to tell me that every generation needs people brave enough to love without permission, to show the world that the old walls can be climbed or torn down entirely." They stood there together, two people who had walked separate roads until destiny braided their paths into something stronger than either could have created alone. And below them, the celebration continued, with a joy that felt like healing, like proof that the world could change one brave choice at a time. Inside the reception hall, magic continued to unfold, in ways both large and small. Amara's brothers danced with Malik's business partners, village elders shared stories with corporate executives, childhood friends from Ilando laughed with graduates from prestigious universities, and in that space, wealth and simplicity existed together, proving that when hearts are open, walls don't stand. The evening stretched long and golden, filled with speeches that made people cry and toasts that made them laugh and dancing that lasted until the stars began to fade. And through it all, Amara and Malik moved through their wedding like people who understood they weren't just celebrating a marriage, but participating in something larger, a statement about value, about worth, about the courage it takes to love someone the world says you shouldn't, and to do it publicly, proudly, without apology. Simone left early, slipping out before the cake was cut, unable to stomach more evidence of her miscalculation, her fundamental misunderstanding of what actually matters. But as she walked to her car, through gardens lit by lanterns that looked like captured stars, she glanced back at the estate, at the lights spilling from windows, at the laughter floating on the ocean breeze, and she understood finally what she had lost. Not Malik, because she had never really had him, had never offered him anything except the surface-level beauty that fades, and the status that shifts, and the kind of love that was really just negotiation. What she'd lost was the chance to be the kind of woman worth choosing, the kind who loved without calculation, who saw value in people rather than portfolios, who understood that power isn't about dominance, but about grace, about lifting rather than standing on top of, about building together rather than conquering alone. She drove home to her penthouse that suddenly felt too large and too empty. And for the first time in her privileged life, Simone understood that there were some things money couldn't buy, and some losses that couldn't be recovered. And the only thing more expensive than humility was the price of pride, maintained too long. Meanwhile, the celebration continued into the early hours of morning, when the sky began to shift from black to navy to the first hints of gold that promised a new day. 5 years passed like a dream made solid, like promises kept and expanded, like love that didn't just survive, but grew deeper and stronger and more beautiful with time. Amara and Malik stood in Ilando, but not as visitors, as builders, as investors in futures that deserved investment, as people who understood that true wealth meant nothing if it wasn't shared. They had funded a school where children who looked like young Amara could learn without limitations, a medical clinic where her father's back might have been treated before it broke, a community center where girls could study trades and business and dream without ceilings. The village gathered to celebrate the opening of these new buildings that gleamed in afternoon sun like manifestations of hope made concrete. And children ran through new classrooms, touching desks and books, with the reverence of those who understand that education is escape velocity from limitation. Elders wept openly, their tears containing decades of prayers finally answered, generations of potential finally given room to grow. Amara's parents stood proud, their daughter no longer just their child, but a symbol of what becomes possible when talent meets opportunity, when dignity meets recognition, when the world finally sees what was always there, waiting to be acknowledged. Malik held their daughter, 2 years old, eyes bright with curiosity, skin glowing like polished mahogany in the afternoon sun, already showing signs of her mother's grace and her father's quiet strength. "She'll grow up knowing both worlds," Amara said softly, watching their daughter reach for butterflies that danced in the golden light. The village and the city, the soil and the boardroom. She'll understand that wealth isn't about what you have, but about what you give. That power isn't about standing above, but about lifting others. That love is the only currency that actually multiplies when you spend it. Malik kissed her temple, his arm around her waist, and said words that felt like completion. "She'll understand, because she has you as her mother, because she'll see by example that worth isn't assigned by the world, but carried within. That dignity can't be given or taken, but only recognized by those wise enough to see it." And standing there in the village, where Amara's story began, surrounded by family and community, and the physical evidence of what love could build, when given foundation and purpose, they understood that their journey wasn't just personal, it was a testimony, a proof, a light for others walking similar roads, who needed to see that the old barriers could be crossed, that love didn't require permission, that destiny recognizes its own. In every generation, there are stories that remind us who we're meant to be, stories that strip away the noise and reveal the simple truths we often forget in our rush toward things that don't actually matter. That love doesn't see status, it sees souls. That worth isn't assigned by the world, it's carried within and recognized by those wise enough to look past surfaces. That destiny doesn't bow to circumstance. It rises above it, patient and persistent, and ultimately victorious. Amara's journey from countryside to ballroom wasn't about wealth or rescue or transformation. From less to more, it was about recognition, about the world finally seeing what had always been there. A woman of immeasurable value, who refused to be invisible, who carried dignity like royalty carries crowns, who loved with the kind of courage that changes everyone it touches. And Malik, he didn't save her. She didn't need saving. He simply had the wisdom to recognize greatness when it stood before him, even when it wore an apron, even when society said he should look elsewhere, even when choosing her meant challenging every assumption his world had made about value. There's an old proverb from Amara's village: gold doesn't lose its value because it's covered in dust. Simone and her friends learned this truth too late. They saw the dust and missed the gold. But those with clear eyes see what matters. They choose love over pride. They choose truth over comfort. They choose the person who makes them better, not the person who makes them look good. In the end, Amara learned that her worth was never defined by floors she cleaned or judgments from those who looked down. Her worth was written into her spirit the day she was born. And when Malik saw that, when he chose her not, despite who she was, but because of who she was, that's when the real story began. Not a story about a maid marrying a billionaire, but a story about two people building a legacy rooted in love, respect, and the understanding that true wealth is measured in hearts you touch, not money you make. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own worth, share it. Tell someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like Amara's don't just entertain, they heal, they inspire, they remind us that the world can be cold, but love is always warm. Until next time, remember, you are worthy, you are seen, and your story is just beginning. Moral: true love sees the soul, not the status. And when two hearts align in truth, no amount of worldly judgment can diminish their light.